Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is, for this panel here, very excited. We've been coming to the Rochester Security Summit for a lot of years. Definitely the best event, I think, that's hosted. Really lucky to have it here in upstate New York. I am very honored to let these guys introduce themselves on a great topic with AI. The more questions you ask, the less I have to ask, so please be interactive with our panel here today. Paul?
Great. So can everyone hear me okay? We got one mic to share, but nobody's ever called me quiet. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. We're going to introduce ourselves, talk about why we're here and what our different interests and foci are in relation to AI. We all have different interests. We had a few calls to discuss the topics today. We think we're in agreement on most of everything, but who knows, it may get spicy up here, so keep your eyes open. We may have some disagreements. But we wanted to talk about three major areas. So risk, we're here at a security summit. We want to talk about risk generally arising from implementation in AI. In my view, I really want to talk about risk for your organizations and what you see on a daily basis. Felix and Bruce will have other thoughts as well. We're going to be talking about regulation. Okay, so if we've got risk, how do we counter it? Who's going to create the rules of the road? We're going to talk about that, give you our thoughts on that. And then I always want to think about the opportunity in this space. We don't want to be the Department of No. We don't want to be kind of missing out on opportunities that are out there in relation to AI. And we all have thoughts in relation to opportunity. Chandra was correct, though. We do want you to ask questions at any point. If you can, feel free to interrupt us with a question. We'll stop and take that question. Otherwise, we'll leave some time at the end. So if we go to the next slide, I guess I'm up first. Why the heck am I here? So I'm an attorney here in town. I am chair of the Privacy and Data Security Practice Group here at Heart of Seacrest. I'm also chair of our Artificial Intelligence and New Technologies Practice Group. I should have used ChatGPT to come up with a better practice group name. If you do the acronym, what is it? Anyone? AINT. I got to change that practice group name. So that shows you what happens when you let human beings create content. And why am I in this space? I am not a technologist. I am the least educated person in this room when it comes to technology. In fact, my background is in Germanic languages and literatures, of all things. I did a PhD in German literature, but I had no idea when I was writing my dissertation that it was kind of about artificial intelligence. I was writing about an author in the 19th century called E.T.A. Hoffmann who wrote about toys coming alive and people interacting with inanimate things and having intelligent conversations with inanimate things. So it kind of goes back in my history. And then why does that have a relation to the law? At least in my view, each one of these questions we'll be dealing with today is a legal question, among other things. And so that's my focus. But I really come at this from a non-technologist point of view. And many of the questions that arise in relation to AI, at least in my view, are non-technological questions. So that's my focus on this talk today.
Look at you, Bruce.
Hey. So hi, so I'm Bruce Cheney, senior enginear with Arctic Wolf. Arctic Wolf is a company that's on a mission to end cyber risk. What we do for our customers is we essentially ingest all of their security-related telemetry into one multiple tenant platform. So we gain visibility on the endpoints, the servers, the network flow, the cloud, the human, the identity, the authentication, whatever is out there, and we get that vendor-neutral visibility, bring it in, enrich it with some threat intelligence, and then when it comes out the other end, we have human interactions with that information where we then deliver back to our customers outcomes. So when we detect ransomware on an endpoint, we contain that endpoint and then work with our customers to figure out what happened, how to get it resolved, how to mitigate it, how to prevent it from happening in the future, and things like that. I'm on this panel today essentially to talk about what we're seeing in the cybersecurity realm related to this artificial intelligence. How are the bad guys using it? And then how are the good guys using it? My stance is going to be for the whole entire thing that the artificial intelligence misses. At the end of the day, it fails, even if it's 1% of the time, or what they call hallucination, right? And when it comes to cybersecurity, you can't have that. So all the artificial intelligence in the world is great, but you have to couple it with human intelligence. You have to have people that are looking at it to make sure that 1% of the time, 5 million events, 1% is like 5,000 things that sneak by, right? When that happens, 500 things that sneak by, but one could be ransomware, right? Bad guys just have to be lucky one time, where we in the the cybersecurity space have to be on every day, right? We can't ever miss. because that one miss means the bad guys get in. So I'm going to talk on that end of the, the spectrum related to AI.
Hi, I'm Felix Knoll. I'm one of the co-founders of Cranium.ai. We are a recent startup. We spun out of KPMG back in March of this year. We built the company in stealth for about 2 years inside of the internal incubator called the KPMG Studio. We were really working around helping some of our large design partners, so large clients in pharma, in financial services, CPG retail, really helping them to secure their AI machine learning models. I think one of the reasons I'm here is because of the size of this crowd. So a year ago, no one wanted to talk about this. AI security was interesting, but not a priority. And then obviously ChatGPT happened in November of last year, and the world changed since then. So now that we've kind of democratized and kind of lowered the barrier of entry for generative AI, every business we talk to, regardless of size or scope or shape, is now leveraging AI in some fashion, or considering leveraging AI in some fashion across all business functions: sales, marketing, finance, customers, product. So we feel we have a mission. Our mission started to secure the AI revolution. Our mission's expanded to both provide security and trust for that lofty goal. So I'm excited here today to answer questions, talk about what we do, and be with this esteemed group.
Felix is also here because I bagged him. I worked with him about 15 years ago, so I haven't seen him in 15 years.
I'm here for Chandra too, so yes, exactly.
Thank you. We're gonna we'll talk first about the risk, like Paul said. We're gonna talk about the risk. We'll talk about the regulation, and then we'll go into the more fun side, the reward of AI. So I want to start. Actually, I'll just kick it back over to you to start, Felix. With this, with the risk, what do you see as primary risks that are out there with the adoption of AI coming into the workforce here?
I mean, there are a lot of risks, obviously. I think some of the stuff that Bruce talked about in terms of precision, hallucination, all those things. I think the risk can be summarized, though, from our opinion, is no enterprise that we talked to, and we've talked to well over 100 organizations even before we spun out of KPMG. Not one single security or risk professional could tell us if they had their arms around AI security. Where is their AI? What AI is in use in the business? What data is in use of these models? How do you secure these models? If we asked who has responsibility for securing the AI, we would talk to data science teams and the security and risk teams. And they do this. Because data science says, look, we make a massive investment. We've got Arctic Wolf, we've got our endpoint tools, we've got a massive security stack. They assumed kind of a hedge of protection based on their proximity to a secure organization. And then you talk to the security team, they say, we have no idea. I have zero visibility into the models that are being pulled down, the data that's being used. So I think the risks associated are really kind of from a visibility first standpoint, and then looking at governance. We're seeing more and more, we deal with not just a large enterprise, but organizations of all sizes. We're seeing things happen in real time. We're seeing things happen where banks are changing their contracts with their customers, saying if you use AI in service of our banks, we need to have some level of transparency. And so what do you do for that? We talk to procurement groups saying, hey, look, AI is now becoming a third party. How do we think about those third parties in service of our organizations? And then from a security standpoint, just how easy is it to attack a model? It's very easy. It's surprisingly easy. And don't take my word for it. So about 18 months ago, Microsoft, Google, and others gave testimony to Congress talking about, because the intelligence community and the military has been kind of the forefront of using AI. And they've leveraged partnerships with some of these large tech companies, and the tech companies basically under oath said, look, it is incredibly easy to bias, perturb, be able to do a white box, black box attack. So basically these are all new threats that today's security technologies weren't ready to handle. So that's kind of what we see right now are some of the major risks associated.
Yeah, thanks, Felix. And I'll throw a question out before I go back over to these guys. But does anybody, I know, at Arctic Wolf, we have a whole policy on it, on AI and adoption and use in the workforce. Just a quick raise of hands. Does anybody have that stuff going on in their own environment? So there are some,
Okay.
but that's
Good.
an interesting show of hands. There's a handful of people that did that right there. But I think it's to your point. It's how do you do it and what's the risk associated. Do you guys want to any other?
Well, I think that's a security and privacy risk, right? That's why they did it to us, because at the time it was coming out that people were, putting samples of code, their private, intellectual, proprietary code, and they're injecting it into ChatGPT to have it tested, or they're saying, here, write me a response to this email that's not aggressive but gets to the point, right? And they're uploading an email, and then getting the response, and then getting the response. Now, write me a reply for this, right? Or write me a LinkedIn feed. Right? So the security piece of it is, what are we sharing, right? Getting a understanding of where it is and how it can be locked down and how it can be secure there. But what are our people doing with it, right? Do we even allow it on, the business computers, right? Because we don't want them just real quick uploading something because once it's there, right? And I think there's also a risk from a bias perspective, right? As with modeling, just learns what you give it. So if you're not giving it clean information, you're going to get not clean information back out, right? So if it's, information that was created from a bias perspective, regardless what that bias is, that's now in there, right? And that's now going to be dumped back out to people. So, and of course, the misses, those hallucinations, it's just the bad information, or when it's checking something, it just doesn't see it. The tool fails, right? At the end of the day, it's still a tool, so you've got to have that human stuff.
Yeah, for me, the question begins with, what is the it? What are we talking about, right? AI is nothing new. You all have AI devices in front of you, several of which are probably listening to me right now. So we're all AI businesses. We all rely on this day to day. When I think about it from an operational standpoint, for many of the organizations in this room, you're going to be buying kind of off-the-shelf solutions. You're not going to be developing models on your own. Maybe not, at least not in the short term. You may not be kind of investing in the biggest machine learning or deep learning BI platform out there. You may be kind of dipping your toe in the water. And what are the problems? What are the risks if you kind of start down that road? And you need to start down that road. Why? Because your stakeholders are already there, right? Your employees are already there. They're putting your regulatory data into large language models to help do their work. Your board is already there because they're really interested in the stuff and want to know what's happening. Your competitors are already there. So there's that fear of missing out, that pace of change that's going to drive you. So what are the risks there? I see four primary risks, really. An overarching risk is that it question. Nobody knows what the heck they're talking about. Most people are talking about generative AI. There are other issues to consider. The bias issue is one of them. Reliability, certainly. Access is another. Who has access to the good tools, who doesn't have access to the good tools. But beyond that level, beyond the it question, there's three primary risks that I see. One is data proliferation, right? We're here at a security conference. What are the two things that really suck about security? It's too much data, and we have users accessing that data. Gosh, if we didn't have those two issues, our jobs would be really easy. AI is going to create a heck of a lot more data, and you're going to get a lot more users playing around with it. Why? Because it's easy, it's sexy, it's democratized, it's cheap. So your data has exploded already because of developments in AI, specifically including generative AI. But as you incorporate it into your operations, that's going to be a problem. Lack of visibility. Back to that it question. You don't know what you're talking about, and you don't know how it works. For many of us, it's a black box. For many of the creators, it's a black box. You talk about a neural network, you can't, the kind of developers can't really fully trace back how something works. And just as it's very difficult to map the human mind and kind of figure out how the color red gets from here to some synapse or some processing center in your brain, it's very difficult to figure out exactly how and explain exactly how these things work. So lack of visibility, which leads to lack of control. Let's go to our regulatory data question, right? If you have a platform that's processing your regulatory data, how do you govern it? How do you govern it if you have too much of the data and you don't have visibility into it? So very common questions that we see on a security basis all the time. The shadow IT, of course, the shadow AI. You have all of your employees who are using AI in some function. That lack of visibility leads to lack of control, which is going to be very difficult for all of us as we implement these solutions.
Any other questions right now? Nobody? Oh. Hi, Bruce.
Compliance standpoint, HIPAA, PCI, any of the other major compliance, is the AI being pointed out in any way? Besides securing it, is there anything else that we should be aware of?
So that's a great question. So I think people ask the question, hey, what are the catalysts for us to do something about it right now, besides the obvious security concerns? So we're seeing right now kind of a couple major frameworks that are driving considerations in this right now. So the FDA is thinking about having some kind of framework for secure use of AI. If you kind of go back in time a little bit, we had the White House came out with an executive order, 13960, the prior administration talking about the secure and resilient use of AI in the public sector. And then they kind of start talking about the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which was published back in January of this year, which gives some basic benchmarks around controls and a kind of a standard controls framework right now that's going to be evolved over time. The big ones we see in terms of where it's going, because there really is multiple regulations at the local, the state, the federal, and even potentially the multinational level. The ones we pay attention to right now in a big way are NIST, and then for those of you familiar with the MITRE attack framework, so MITRE actually has a subset of that called Atlas. And Atlas is a research team focused specifically on adversarial threats against AI and machine learning systems. They've done a great job. So they have done a job like basically cataloging real world and modeled and simulated attacks against some of the largest large language models in the world, everything from like Microsoft to OpenAI, and also doing work with the intelligence community and the military. And they also catalog the threats. So MITRE.org has an excellent catalog of those threats, and they have about 64 different kind of indications they look at right now. And then selfishly, the person who ran that research team just joined our company 2 weeks ago. So his name is Josh Hargis. We'll be announcing him shortly, but he did a lot of red teaming work for us to kind of help inform our thinking in terms of just how real is the threat and how do we look to safeguard those things. The other thing is, from a global standpoint, we think that right now that the EU once again is taking the leadership position like they did with GDPR. So remember, GDPR kind of forced the world to really think about privacy in a material way, and Europe just kind of went ahead of the US on privacy regulation. That spurred a whole new business, but right now, that because you had kind of a 4% turnover penalty, that kind of forced business to take privacy seriously. So the EU has what's called the EU AI Act, which was voted on back in June of this year. It'll be fully ratified by the European Commission, we believe, later this year as well. So that's had the impact already of a couple things. So if you remember from, like, show of hands, remember that ChatGPT got banned in Italy? You guys remember that? It got quietly unbanned a few months later because OpenAI agreed to conform with the privacy standards in the EU's AI Act. So we're seeing that kind of have the impact of almost like de facto regulation. There's a lot of discussion about using that as a benchmark right now. So we think between the EU's AI Act, which we know that multinational companies here in the US are already thinking about, between NIST and MITRE, and then the last one I'll mention is California. So California is, just like with CCPA, they are rushing out ahead. Their CISO is on a mission right now to unify all the California agencies and to get ahead of other states, because California likes to lead on this kind of stuff. They're thinking about having basically a very strong framework in terms of managing security and privacy and governance around the AI models if you are in-state or you're doing business with the state of California. So those are kind of what we see right now as the evolving pieces around this. That's kind of, but it's growing day to day.
Felix, I have a comment there.
Yeah.
For Bruce. So, and Bruce, thinking about your current regulatory concerns, that's an open question, right? Felix is totally right that there are jurisdictions trying to put rules on this from the top down. What about everything else? What about HIPAA, GLBA, PCI? What about the state requirements that you have? Think about the recent guidance that came out from OCR in relation to use of the Facebook pixel, right? They came out with guidance that says, hey, if you use the Facebook pixel on your website, that likely collects EPHI, and that's likely a HIPAA violation. That blew everyone on their rear ends, because how do you build a website? You throw Google Analytics and a Facebook pixel on there, right? And it's only after OCR took a look at the problem, only after there was an expose on the problem, that they gave guidance. So we're going to have frameworks, we're going to have products, and then all of our other secondary regulators are going to deal with problems later on. So you may end up building a whole process around AI if you're in a regulated space, and then have to pull that process if you get guidance that says, you know what, that's not good. So it's part of your risk assessment. You need to figure out, well, listen, how easily can we disengage from this process? Do we have alternatives? How does this relate to other guidance that we're aware of? It's an open question and very difficult to deal with in those other regulatory spaces.
Just one point on that. I think what's going to happen is because I agree with you, it's changing, you're going to have some kind of transparency. So we think whether it's like an AI bill of materials or some level of transparency that doesn't disclose anything proprietary, but that you can share with internal stakeholders, your customers, eventual auditors, et cetera. It's got to some kind of minimum table stakes to be able to share, to talk about the AI either that you're using or you're going to require your third parties to certify in use of your business, towards your business.
Did you have a question too? I know you raised your hand before.
I did, yeah. I was just curious what's being done from an intellectual property risk standpoint for those that are using AI and not being careful with what they upload. Is there anything moving forward to protect for if you use your IP? From my understanding, if you upload anything that has
has IP to AI, it now becomes public. You lose your IP rights. Is that true? And what are your thoughts on that?
Let's ask the lawyer first.
Right, I'm going to defer to Governor. Governor?
And here's the attorney's answer: it depends, of course. So let's talk about trade secrets initially. Certainly, if you put what are trade secrets? The things that you keep confidential that have a value to your business. And what's the most important thing? That you keep them confidential, right? And so if you've got employees putting your trade secrets into a large language model to figure out something, you may be losing some protection there. And it all, of course, turns on the things that none of us read, right? The terms and conditions of using GPT. I mean, how many folks here have used a Bing, ChatGPT, any of the large language models? Me, of course. How many have read the terms and conditions before they use? Me, of course. So that's the issue, right? Whatever the terms say, that's probably what's going to happen. Now, IP rights, patent rights, and copyright rights, for example, trademark, it depends what happens there. And it's not likely that you lose all rights just because you use it in relation to an AI platform. But the organization needs to think about that and educate its stakeholders, right? So, I'll draw an analogy. If you go in a breach scenario, the first question from an employee is, what about my data? And the second question is, how can I help? People want to help. People want to do the right thing. Same thing in relation to AI. If you set the boundaries, set the guidelines, people can say, oh yeah, I don't want the company to lose its fill in the blank, so I'm going to be careful with that.
Before we go off of risk, the only other one I'll ask on this topic is just from a cybersecurity standpoint, maybe Bruce, if you want to comment on, how are, you mentioned ransomware, how are bad actors really using AI? How are they leveraging that? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's both, we're trying to use it on the defensive end of things, right? Trying to be able to detect and respond, more quickly and analyze more data. But the bad guys are using it to their advantage, right? So it's just the continuous, cat and mouse chase. One of the early things that we saw were just convincing emails. So all those phishing attacks were used to say, you look for the bad language and the bad grammar and the punctuation and the different fonts and the things like that. All that stuff is now, being corrected. It can be targeted. They can use it to analyze large amounts of information, from social media to try to get in and target attacks. They can run automated attacks and exploits against large data sets. So, creating, for instance, password lists, generating password lists based on certain criteria and then playing those, against, brute force attacks and things like that. I think it's so new that, that it's still an uncertainty as to what it's doing. I mean, there's, indications of, malware being developed that is beating, your endpoint protection, right? It's becoming stealth and being able to move and manipulate itself enough that it avoids detection, right? So which means that, the endpoint stuff has to get better now to try to find the anomaly and figure out what's going on. So again, it's just a cat and mouse chase. I don't think it's anything really new. It's the same weaknesses that we have are the same weaknesses that we need to address, your patching and your external vulnerabilities and your user management, user training and that kind of stuff, regardless of how we're being attacked. They're still going to exploit those things, right? So shore that stuff up and regardless of how good they get, hopefully we can still, beat them.
So the thing that concerns me about AI and cybersecurity is the decrease in the quality of the attacker. And by quality, I don't mean their ability to get in your system. By quality, I mean, what kind of thief are they? Are they a professional thief? It's good to deal with professionals. If you're hit with ransomware and you got professionals on the other side, if you have to pay the ransom, the key's going to work, period. That's their business model. That's their value proposition. If it's some kid in his basement who's figured out on Fraud GPT or Worm GPT or tricked GPT or Bing to tell him or her how to hack you, they're going to buy this little fish package over here. Fish kit over here. They're going to buy this ransomware variant, try and detonate it with you, and good luck dealing with that non-professional, right? Who knows if they even know how it works? Who knows if they can help you? As many of you may know, ransomware groups have helplines, right? They've got tech support. They're going to help you. Is the guy in his basement going to do that? I used to say, I'm an 80s kid, right? So war games, I used to say the hacker's not Matthew Broderick in his basement. Well, it's a kid in his basement, and it's not even Matthew Broderick because he knew how to code back then. It's some kid who has no idea, who knows how to prompt, and all of the kids are going to know how to prompt, and can figure out how to get into your system, and then you're dealing with a wild card in that regard. So less technological are my concerns, rather dealing with the kind of quality of the attackers that we're going to be facing going forward.
His name's not Matthew. It's like Vladimir,
There you go.
Boris.
It is Matthew, though, but more and more, we're going to see this onshore, because kids don't care. We're going to see it onshore. Go ahead.
How does an organization start to establish a governance model?
You asked my next question. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate
Yeah.
you. Yeah. So and I know Felix already started it. So great question.
I
It
know
really
a
is,
guy.
let's
know
get
some
into
guys.
let's get into the regulation and then the reward side of it. This isn't supposed to just be a downer session. So let's talk about how we can actually help people here.
I'm not down on AI. So great question. I think where do you start? I think first off, most companies don't have one single person who owns just kind of security or governance. So it's important to probably get a group together. Typically you want to have a security professional, a risk professional, often legal, and then the data science team, whoever that is in your organization. Kind of get them as almost a steering committee. At the end of the day, we see it kind of moving towards security as the ultimate owner of this function right now. We've seen some places have hired like a data science security director and a couple of organizations, but that right now, it's still, you have this AI steering committee. So start there first and kind of lay out the major concerns. So a lot of times, innovation is happening that's fully disconnected from the security and risk teams. It's happening in the business. CEOs and boards say, look, everyone else is using generative AI. We know that people are going at breakneck speeds to either to do, augment our current employees, maybe hire fewer folks to be able to drive more efficiency, leveraging AI co-pilots, create new products and services. So make sure you have awareness and visibility in those initiatives. And then also the considerations around what are the downstream implications of patent protection around things like we talked about. So if you're averaging, at least have some kind of acceptable use policy around when you're leveraging these kind of consumer-facing services. So I would say that's the first thing is get the group together, talk about what innovation's being driven right now, and then also consideration with your third parties, because third parties more and more are going to be kind of a backdoor that you have to be mindful of. So whether you're leveraging, like I think New York State 144, 145 talks about bias in hiring. Like if you're leveraging some kind of hiring platform that has an AI-based algorithm for determining candidates, are you impacted if you inadvertently screen someone out because of an AI system? So think about all those kind of things and then risk rank them in terms of priority. Likely the priority is going to be what are the new products and services that are material to our top line or to our bottom line in terms of efficiencies. And then the next thing is, we would say, is to get an inventory, is to be able to get inventory of all the systems you have, so whether it's consumer-facing, internally developed, or if you're pulling in third-party large language models from Hugging Face, for example, make sure you understand what is in use within our business organization today, how do you map that, what users are touching that, what data is associated, and then how do we wrap that from a security perspective, and then also in terms of being able to create at least a minimum kind of a transparency report for the ones that matter most. So if those are, let's say, your production models that are being used to serve as a client, is there some kind of minimum transparency report you want to have that you could say, hey, look, we at least map to NIST or to some future regulation that's going to have kind of teeth, things like that. That's what we think was kind of the first step you want to take. It's easier to manage if you could see it and understand it. And then from there, I think this is kind of an early journey. Like, how do you mature into monitoring? How do you mature into third party, those kind of programs? There's a lot of things you can do. I don't think people are really ready to do like model scanning. You don't want to, things we recommend you don't want to do. You don't want to get something where you've got to interrupt how your data scientists work, because they are typically, building software is very different than actually training and testing and deploying models. It's just very different, apples and oranges. So if you can kind of make it light touch for your data scientist teams to work and be partners in this, you're going to find you're going to get a lot more transparency and collaboration with your teams, as opposed to like finding a way to get them to kind of change how they build, how they test, they train, how they register their models. You may still decide it's the best thing for your business, but we find that adds more friction in the process.
I have a question. How many folks here think that security should own AI implementation in their organization? Well, you end up owning it in the end, right? If it concerns a computer, some kind of new technology, management comes by and says, well, you're the security person. Tell us how this works. Can I do this? Is this too dangerous? What the heck does this thing do? I think, yes.
I have a question just from the perspective of, from information security monitoring data, maybe a DLP solution would be a possible tool in the future, where it tracks some of the data that's egressing through AI prompts.
Yeah, I think DLP is one way to look at it. I think from a kind of data rest and data motion standpoint, I think that the difference is in some cases you may be using pre-trained data sets, and so how do you actually analyze those pre-trained data sets? And a lot of the DLP today is not necessarily set up to embed into the MLOps platform. So it's a great point, and there's a lot of technologies out there, whether you're leveraging a URL filter list from your next-gen firewall provider. Their Chrome extensions for your browser can kind of give you some kind of level of prompt control, but there's not one tried and true thing. We think the best thing is just to kind of start out with mapping. I agree with your point. To start with kind of mapping the inventory of those systems first, and then build a policy around what do you do? Because a lot of organizations try to block it. So at KPMG, once we spun out, KPMG tried to block ChatGPT, but everyone's using it. So even on their phone. So what do you do? So you go back and say, here's our policy for using it, and then you can leverage capabilities like Azure OpenAI Service, which is a more secure way to leverage a large language model without having your data and your prompts go back and train OpenAI. But if you don't have a group that kind of looks at that holistically, you may be set up with a policy that kind of leaves you exposed.
I want to get back to that governance issue, and Felix mentioned a policy, right? You can't have governance without a document. How do you write that document? If management comes to you and says, hey, you're the security team, give me an AI policy, what the heck do you do? Well, Felix referenced go to ChatGPT. No, don't do that. Do not do that. No, it's not. It's actually not. Do it a few times. It comes out different each time. I mean, the interesting thing about so if you ask ChatGPT for the top 10 principles of AI governance, it'll give you 6 or 7 that are always the same, and it'll throw in some other ones that change from time to time. A great place to start is the NIST risk management framework. Felix talked about it as a high-level approach. I mean, if you're familiar and if you've gone through the NIST cybersecurity framework, very similar. And all those steps that Felix were talking about are the steps inside of the risk management framework. Map, measure, manage, and govern, right? Map, figure out what you have, measure the risk, figure out a way to manage it, and then build the governance around it. And if your governance document looks like that, follows that path, follows that framework, it's going to be very hard to kind of find fault with it. And the other thing I'll say is this. In that steering committee, I absolutely recommend that most organizations should have a committee talking about AI. In that steering committee, don't just give it to security. Make sure you have somebody without a technical background on that committee, because a lot of these issues are just non-technical issues. They're brand issues. They're IP issues. There are other issues concerning what it means for our workforce, what it means for our customers. And so if you put that person with skin in the game, give that person authority on that committee, you're going to get leverage as the security person to say, well, listen, it's not just me talking, it's the CFO or whoever it is, whoever owns risk in the organization. And you're going to have a megaphone to get the message across in relation to AI governance. So the risk management framework, I think, is a very good place to start.
How do you see cyber insurance being impacted by, obviously, maturity around AI, regulation, compliance, and governance?
In case you can't hear in the back of the room, his question was around cyber insurance in regards to AI.
They're going to be asking soon what you do with AI on their questionnaires, right? For the very same reason, right? Yeah. You've had that already? Yep. It depends on the carrier. It really depends on the carrier, right?
They don't really know yet. So the early secret in the cyber insurance business, there's a belief that there's some kind of risk model that's adjusted for cyber risk, that they can quantify your risk and be able to adjust your premiums. Like, I know a lot of insurance companies, I don't think that actually fully exists. The best they could do right now is to give you an amendment on your policy, or say we could actually give you a policy just based on the massive explosion in ransomware. It's almost impossible for them to do coverage because their loss ratios are so high given the prevalence of ransomware recently. So I think that what they're doing is they're looking at the risks associated with these AI models because they're becoming intellectual property. So it's almost like, how do you insure intellectual property? So I think that right now they're trying to get their arms around how our customers will be using it, where is it connected to business, what are the risks associated, because if you are creating a model or using a third-party model and modifying it in use of your business, that becomes your core IP. That's a consideration you have to think about in terms of how do you assign a loss value to that. So I think it's good they're looking at it. I know real organizations like Munich Reinsurance and others are thinking about this now. I think there will be some kind of guidance or some kind of policy to write, but it's still early days from our view.
We don't have a lot of time left, so we're going to jump into the reward side. This is the fun side. My brother's in the audience. He sent me a text message a few weeks ago, and very nice, over-the-top nice message about what a wonderful sister I was and all the things I've done for him growing up. And then he said, yeah, I use ChatGPT. So, but there are benefits. I was like very floored by the nice message. But guys, maybe we can talk about what are the rewards, associated. How can businesses adopt it and benefit from it, internally?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take from the cybersecurity end of it. I think it's just going to lead to faster detections, faster response time, being able to get through large data sets, large amount of logs, more quickly, looking for patterns, and identifying, things on a global landscape, right? So, looking at billions and billions of pieces of telemetry and being able to quickly, filter through that. Again, I can't stress it enough, though, you can't miss. In the cybersecurity world, you have to be on every day. And the bad guys just have to get lucky once. So, have all the AI, have it out there, have it crunching, have it looking. But as it's filtering down, you've got to have that human validation. Just like if you use ChatGPT to create something. And, there's... I just listened to a guy speak the other day, and he was talking about trying to engage his son in reading and wanted to quiz him on a Harry Potter book he was reading, but he didn't want to read the book, so he just said, hey, give me some questions on chapter 12 from this Harry Potter book. Tell me that are geared towards a 13-year-old or whatever, and it spit it out. And the dad was asking the kid the questions, and the kid was like, well, I know that answer, but that's not from chapter 7, that's from chapter 10. So it had the right information, but it was just wrong, right? So if you were using that and relying on that to be, this is that chapter 7 piece of information, it was just inaccurate, right? And I would have never known unless you go and fact check it, right? So it's still far from being, anywhere near perfect. So you have to just make sure you check things, right? Have that human interaction with it. But who knows what it's going to bring.
I mean, I'm bullish on the future of AI. I think it's creating new jobs. I think people talk about you're going to lose your job to AI. I don't believe you will. I think if you will enhance your job through an AI co-pilot in some way, shape, or form. They're creating new jobs already. We've heard of probably prompt engineers. That's a real thing. Those are jobs getting hired. There's a new one you may not have heard of. It's called a kill switch engineer. So when you get the hand signal, the machines turn on. You throw a bucket of water on the server farm, and we're all good. Maybe a later stage job for us. But what's that? So I think that we look at, so in our business, we're a startup, and I think that we think about leveraging AI in all parts of our business. We want to be an AI-first company. So we hire developers. We talked about, can you use AI as a co-pilot to be able to develop code faster and better? Like in sales and marketing, can we leverage AI to write scripts, to be able to automate the interaction with some of our clients, to be able to be 24/7 service delivery, things like that. There's, in finance, looking at efficiencies in terms of how do we analyze, get more effective with our cash management. So I think that AI has a lot of applications. And I think that what we'll see in our lifetime, which is from a healthcare standpoint, we've had a chance to work with a lot of large life science organizations. They've been at the forefront of using AI well before generative AI was a thing. And I'm actually excited to see what kind of breakthroughs they're doing, because the ability to fold a protein 500,000 times in a short amount of time to create a new drug, the ability to have better healthcare interaction with older people who maybe are underserved because it's difficult right now with the shortage of healthcare workers. There's a lot of potential right now. So even all the risks and security from a security compliance standpoint, I'm very bullish on the future, especially from a healthcare standpoint for us.
So on the security front, we'll get to your question in just a second. On the security front, I'm hopeful that AI can help us with the user, because the user is broken, right? We're never going to be able to train the user appropriately. The user is our number one risk surface, right? So we talk about co-pilots, we talk about caregivers. Don't we need kind of a general user co-pilot, general user kind of caregiver, a parent kind of over that, watching that user and saying, do you really want to do that? Or, hey, watch out for this. That little warning we put on our emails, right? Watch out, and it's an external email. You get eye blind to it, and you click. We need our systems to be smart and to be able to predict what we as users are going to do to put our system at risk. And I think that AI is particularly positioned to be able to do that. Second, again, on the security front, and again, I'm not the technologist, but T in GPT stands for transformer, right? I got this vision of the transformers kind of fighting it out. You got the bad guy over here, and they're using AI and generative AI to get in your systems, and you've got your bots fighting their bots. That's going to be a necessity. I don't know if it's an opportunity, but certainly the speed of attacks and the speed of what's going on is going to lead to a need to automate that. Period. So I do think there's opportunity, especially in a place like Rochester. Hopefully we'll have some innovation here that we can take advantage of with our wonderful universities that are here. But being open to the changes, being open to the opportunity, I think is the biggest opportunity itself. Not closing your mind. We're in a law firm, right? And when our younger attorneys came and said, well, they didn't ask if they could use large language models, they just started using them. And right when the old partners like me found out, they're like, oh, we've got to shut that down. They can't do it. But of course, you get the shadow AI, and everybody's using it anyway. There's no way to stop it, and so the only way to take advantage of the opportunity is to be open to it, at least in my mind. So there was a question over here. Yes.
Yeah, just, Paul, having read the terms and conditions of ChatGPT, how comfortable are you in sharing sensitive information with it?
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah. And most of them say do not share sensitive information with us. So getting back to my website example, Google Analytics and Facebook say don't share sensitive information with us. What does everybody do? Share sensitive information with them. So the one given you can take is if it says don't do it in the terms and conditions, your users are probably doing it.
Are there any other questions before we do some quick closing thoughts here? Yeah.
What about on the privacy front? I know that we talk about security and of course PII being involved, but what about privacy and regulation on privacy?
That's a great question. And we talked about AI regulation. There is a lot of AI regulation already on the books, and it's mostly in the privacy space. Felix mentioned Local Law 144 in New York City. That just came out, right? And that says if you use AI in relation to HR decisions, those AI platforms have to go through a yearly bias audit. And this is really interesting because we don't have an overarching set of rules. We're going to have smaller jurisdictions lead the way. How influential is a hiring law in New York City? Pretty darn influential, right? There's a lot of organizations that have their headquarters there that are going to build their processes around that. So privacy will lead the way in many respects. It's not the only concern. We've talked about some of the IP concerns, but it's a big one. Some of the other privacy restrictions under GDPR, you've got the ability to opt out of automated decision making. You've got an option to have a human being make your decision in certain circumstances if it involves a kind of legal or other significant effects. I think that's going to be a hallmark, and I think it really should be a hallmark to kind of make sure there's job security for all of us, right? The backup decision for the machine that makes the decision in the first instance. And then you get the issue of what's happening with the data and where is my data going. Are my prompts personal data? Probably, right? The stuff that I'm putting in there, write me an email for my lovely sister Chandra, right? That's probably personal information and probably regulated. The models aren't necessarily ready for that. It's very hard to unwind that. Many models are built on questionable data sets from an IP and from a privacy perspective. So privacy will move kind of in parallel with this kind of top-down regulation. And that needs to, from a governance perspective, that needs to be one of our main concerns. If I'm consumer-facing or if I have employees, we all have employees, what am I doing with that data? And gosh, maybe I should walk slow with that. Put my financial, put my non-personal data in there first and analyze that, get more visibility into that, and be more careful with the personal information I deal with.
You guys are going to have to do your closing thoughts, I think, in 30 seconds?
No, we got a few more minutes.
Few more?
6
What do we
minutes.
have? 6 minutes?
6 minutes.
Okay, so you guys get 2 minutes each. Let's go, Bruce.
So my closing thought is very straightforward. Same closing thought regardless of what type of panel I'm on or what type of presentation I'm doing. It's overwhelming. It's a lot of information you just heard from all different sides of things. If you think that you need to do something, just come and ask somebody. Talk to somebody, figure it out. Don't try to tackle it yourself, right? Just like everything else that we did, right? When it was time for, Ed Law 2D in the schools, for instance, right? We had to get guidance on how to do that, right? And, so with AI, if you think that you're there, you see people are using it, it's going to start, being part of your tool set. You need policy, you need something, you don't know what to do, go and find somebody that will help you. Go and talk to Felix, talk to Paul, talk to me, find somebody, right? You have that trusted advisor. Everybody has a trusted advisor somewhere. Talk to that person and get in touch with the right people that'll help you. It would be better to adopt it properly now than to try to, run around 2 years from now, and especially with the complexity of these, these modeling systems. Okay, so just ask for help if you need it.
That's a great point. So in terms of asking for help, I don't think we have emails here, but you could reach out to hello@cranium.ai. So outside of a commercial for our business, we work with the ISACs, so the FS ISAC, Healthcare ISACs, a lot of the organizations, a group called the GRF, which backends all those technologies. So we've actually put together a security practitioner's guide and a security leader's guide for securing AI. So just some thoughts. We worked with research organizations, worked with the U.S. government, worked with major companies, just get some ideas and thoughts around this. So I'm happy to share that with who the organizers are here for RSS, so you all can easily get that from us. It's an email. It's not a Cranium commercial on that. Other than that, if you're interested, reach out, hello@cranium.ai, and we have we think, a good first step to getting your arms around kind of mapping, managing, governing this. So thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, so we talked about that steering committee internally. Having conversations externally is incredibly important as well. If it's through something like an ISAC or another group that you're in, find out what others are doing in the field. Make sure that you feel comfortable with what your organization is doing. So a quick question, how many of us love social media? I kind of love social media. How many of us hate social media? I really hate social media, right? So we did a terrible job in relation to the rollout of social media. The risks were maybe kind of clear. They were building an addictive platform. We're really good as a society dealing with Orwell. We know what surveillance looks like. We say, well, AI shouldn't surveil us. We should have privacy in our lives. What about Huxley? What about the addictive nature of modern society, the addictive nature of technology? What are we thinking about what we lose as human beings, what we lose as organizations, when we spend all of our days glued to this because it really knows how to make us glued to this? Those are important questions. They have kind of philosophical questions, but what you do day to day at your organizations actually has an impact in that regard. How much you rely on AI, how much you're able to understand the risks. This is really important stuff because things are going to change, and things are going to change pretty fast. And gosh, the last time we did this, we didn't do very well. We don't think about externalities very well. Everything has an exhaust pipe. AI has an exhaust pipe. What is it? Is it that data proliferation? Is it the risk? Is it the reliance? Is it the addiction? Who knows? But let's hopefully have the conversations in advance so that the impacts of those exhaust pipes can be minimized.
Appreciate the time here, everyone. Feel free to ask questions after. Enjoy the rest of the Security Summit.
Thank you.